In the forgotten countryside of England, at the very edge of the moor, stood a place of elegance and sorrow, Ashford Manor. Its halls echoed with secrets too cruel for time to remember, haunted by the sound of a woman's laughter and a portrait whose eyes followed anyone who dared to look too long. No one truly knew the truth until a young historian arrived. He came seeking to study beauty, but instead found a tragedy that would claim his very soul. This isn't just a tale of ghosts. It's a story of a love that refused to die, painted in ash and memory. Every brushstroke holds a heartbeat still trembling beneath the canvas. Tonight, we open the doors to Ashford Manor once more. Step quietly, breathe slowly, and whatever you do, don't look too long into the portrait's eyes. Welcome to our channel. If you love a good mystery, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss what happens next in The Portrait in the Ashford Attic. The year was 1930 when I first arrived at Ashford Manor. In the neighboring towns, they whispered about it with a mix of awe and unease. It was late autumn, and a silver fog veiled the countryside. The air smelled of damp leaves and forgotten seasons. My carriage creaked along a gravel path that wound through skeletal trees, their branches arching over the road like blackened ribs, guiding me toward the manor's dark silhouette. I'd been invited by my distant cousin, Lord Nathaniel Ashford, to catalogue his family's vast collection of portraits. It was a task both academic and restorative, as he'd written. I'd just finished a commission in Vienna and welcomed the solitude the English countryside promised. Yet, as the manor loomed before me, I felt that peculiar tightening in my chest, the kind that warns you of a place where time and decay walk hand in hand. The iron gates groaned open. My driver, a quiet man from the village, crossed himself when the house came into view. "Best of luck to you, sir," he muttered, refusing to meet my gaze. "Folks say the manor keeps its own company after nightfall." I dismissed him with a half-smile, though his words lingered. The manor stood on a rise, its stone walls blotched with centuries of moss and rain. Its tall, narrow windows stared out like mournful eyes. From the highest gable I thought I saw a flicker of movement, like someone drawing back a curtain. Just the light playing tricks, I told myself. A silent, stooped butler greeted me at the door. His name, I would learn, was Mr. Claiborne. "Lord Ashford awaits you in the library," he said, his voice so soft it seemed to dissolve into the dust around us. Inside, the air was heavy with age, smelling of wax and old velvet. Portraits lined the walls, their eyes following me with unnerving precision. Every step echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. When I entered the library, Nathaniel rose from an armchair near the fire. He was tall, with an aristocratic bearing, though thinner now, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "My dear cousin," he greeted, extending a trembling hand, "you've no idea how grateful I am that you've come." We spoke for some time. He explained his desire to have the portraits restored, particularly those on the upper floors, long neglected since his father's death. "There is one, however," he said hesitantly, "that I would ask you not to touch. It hangs in the attic, a portrait of my great-aunt, Lady Evelyn Ashford. The family believed it cursed." I laughed softly, but he didn't join me. "Surely, Nathaniel, we are beyond such superstitions." He just stared into the fire. "You may find that the past is not so easily dismissed here." As the clock struck 8, I was shown to my room at the far end of the west wing. The corridor leading there was narrow and dimly lit. The portraits seemed older, more decayed. Some had cracked canvases, others had eyes that seemed alive in the flickering light. My room was large but cold. I was exhausted from my journey and paid little heed to the house's gloom. That night, I slept uneasily. The wind whispered through the chimney. Once, I thought I heard footsteps in the corridor, soft, deliberate, halting right at my door. I rose, my heart hammering, and listened. Nothing but silence. I told myself it was just Claiborne making his rounds, but before returning to bed, I noticed something strange. the faint scent of lavender, though no flowers bloomed this late in the season. Morning brought little relief. The fog had thickened, and the manor seemed adrift in a sea of gray. Over breakfast, I asked Claiborne about the attic. As he poured my tea, his hands trembled. "The attic, sir," he said. "It has been locked for many years. Lord Ashford keeps the key. I would advise you to stay clear of that part of the house. The floorboards are treacherous." Later that afternoon, as I worked in the gallery, Nathaniel joined me. He seemed restless, his eyes darting toward the ceiling. "Have you noticed the house's peculiar atmosphere?" he asked. "It has character," I replied lightly. "Character," he repeated. "Yes, that is one way to describe a presence that refuses to die." When I pressed him for clarity, he just smiled, a thin, haunted smile, and excused himself. As evening fell, the manor grew silent again. I spent hours sketching one of the older portraits until the candles burned low. Then, just as I prepared to retire, I heard it, a faint tapping sound from above, rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails against wood. I froze. The sound continued for nearly a minute, then ceased. I told myself it was the wind, or a rat in the rafters, but when I looked at the ceiling, I could have sworn I saw a faint, moist shadow bleeding through the plaster, roughly the shape of a face. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of indistinct figures whispering my name. When I awoke, the first pale light of dawn revealed something that made my blood run cold. On the table beside my bed lay a single, withered sprig of lavender. The next day, I resolved to confront Nathaniel. I found him in the conservatory, staring blankly at dead vines. "The house does strange things to one's mind," he murmured when I mentioned the noises. "It feeds on grief, I think. My father believed that every sorrow ever felt within these walls still lingers here." "And the portrait of Lady Eveline?" I asked. "Why is it locked away?" He turned sharply. "Because she should never have been painted," he whispered. "The artist died shortly after completing it. He swore the lady had moved while he worked. Her eyes, he said, were not those of the living." That night, I could bear the suspense no longer. After everyone had retired, I armed myself with a candle and made my way up the narrow servant stairs toward the attic. The air grew colder as I ascended, heavy with dust and neglect. At the final landing, I found it, a massive oak door banded with iron. It was locked, as expected, but the strangest thing was the faint glow beneath it, as if candlelight flickered within. I bent closer, my breath catching in my throat. From the other side came the softest sound, like a woman's sigh. Then, unmistakably, a whisper. "Don't look at her." The candle in my hand guttered violently, nearly extinguished by an icy breath that seeped through the keyhole. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. The whisper had been clear, human, yet the corridor behind me was empty. As I fled down the stairs, I could feel it, something unseen watching from above, following my every step. When I reached my chamber, I bolted the door and sat trembling in the dark. And through the silence that followed, I heard it again, faint but certain, from somewhere far above in the attic. Tap, 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 as though someone had begun to move behind the portrait in the dark. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling journey. What do you think is happening in Ashford Manor? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe, and see you next time. When morning came, I tried to convince myself it was all a dream. The whisper, the tapping, just my overtired mind playing tricks on me. But there was one thing I couldn't shake. The faint scent of lavender still hanging heavy in the air. It was unmistakable. Ashford Manor seemed quieter than usual that day, as if the entire house was holding its breath. Even the servants tiptoed around, their footsteps hushed. Nathaniel joined me for breakfast, looking pale and distracted. I wanted to tell him about my late-night adventure, but I couldn't. His hands were trembling so violently as he lifted his teacup, and his eyes kept darting toward the ceiling, toward the part of the house we both feared. "I dreamt of her again," he finally murmured. "Lady Eveline." I could hear her breathing, as if she were standing right beside my bed. I tried to offer some comfort, forcing a smile. "You just need to rest, Nathaniel. This old house, it preys on the imagination." He looked at me then, his eyes hollow, his voice barely a whisper. "She has no need of imagination." She was awake. The certainty in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. Later that day, I tried to lose myself in my work in the West Gallery. A thick fog pressed against the windows, erasing the outside world and trapping me with the portraits in a pale, breathless limbo. Each painting I catalogued seemed to seep sorrow. Sad-eyed ladies, vain lords, children long since turned to dust. But one canvas pulled me in more than any other. A woman in a deep green gown. Her face was strangely familiar. Her soft but unyielding gaze seemed to follow my every move. I checked the inscription on the frame, and my heart hammered in my chest. Lady Eveline Ashford, 1871. But how? Nathaniel had said her portrait was locked away in the attic. This one, though old and cracked, bore the same name. I leaned closer. Beneath the layers of varnish and dust, her painted eyes seemed alive, like a hidden flame was burning behind the pigment. Her lips, though perfectly still, seemed to hold a hint of contempt. Or maybe it was a warning. I felt this strange compulsion to sketch her. My pencil flew across the page, tracing the curve of her cheek, her mouth. But when I got to her eyes, my hand just stopped. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't capture their depth. It was like she refused to be drawn again. As the afternoon light faded, a bone-deep chill filled the gallery. And then I heard it, the faint creak of floorboards from directly above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth in the attic. My heart started thudding against my ribs. "Nathaniel?" I called out softly. The only answer was the echo of my own voice dying in the silence. I quickly gathered my things, but as I left, I could still feel those eyes on my back, cold, unblinking, and full of judgment. That evening, a monster of a storm broke over the manor. Thunder cracked and rolled across the hills, and the whole house shuddered with each gust of wind. I ate dinner alone. Nathaniel had gone to bed early again with another one of his dreadful headaches. The butler, Claiborne, moved like a phantom, appearing and disappearing without a sound. When the grandfather clock struck 10, I couldn't fight it any more. That faint memory of a glow under the attic door was eating away at me. Against all my better judgment, I grabbed a candle and headed back to the west corridor. The storm had snuffed out most of the lights, and the hallway was a maze of shadows. The eyes of the portraits glittered as I passed, watching me go. I paused at the bottom of the attic stairs. The door at the top was waiting, silent and imposing. I felt this intense pull, a mixture of pure dread and overwhelming curiosity. I started climbing, each step groaning under my weight. When I reached the landing, I saw that something had changed. The glow was gone, but the door, which I knew had been locked, was now standing slightly ajar. I froze. A draft of cold air snaked through the gap, carrying that same distinct scent of lavender. "Is someone there?" I whispered. Only silence answered. My hand shaking, I pushed the door open. The attic was huge, a graveyard of forgotten furniture and ghostly shapes draped in white sheets. Dust hung thick in the air, and my single candle threw long, dancing shadows across the rafters. I stepped inside. And there, at the far end of the room, was an easel. On it was the portrait. Lady Eveline Ashford. It was terrifyingly beautiful. The colors were still so vibrant. Her deep gray eyes looked almost wet in the candlelight, her skin glowing against the dark background. And even though it was just a painting, I was utterly convinced that she knew I was there. I felt myself walking toward it, like I was being pulled by an invisible string. "Lady Evelyn," I murmured, trying to sound casual, "forgive the intrusion." The candle flame suddenly leaped and danced, as if in response, and for a split second, I swear her expression changed. Her lips curved, not into a smile but into a look of recognition. Then, a sudden gust of wind blew out my candle. The attic plunged into a darkness so total it felt like a physical weight pressing on my eyes. And then I heard it. From the other side of the room, the soft shuffle of fabric, the creak of a floorboard. Someone, or something, was moving toward me in the pitch black. I scrambled backward, fumbling for the stairs. My hand brushed against a cold wooden surface, another frame, maybe, and then a whisper, right next to my ear. "Why do you look at me?" I didn't wait for an answer. I bolted. The attic door slammed shut behind me as if pushed by an unseen hand. I practically fell down the stairs, and when I reached the corridor, I risked a glance back. The door was closed tight, but this time there was no light glowing from underneath it, just a thin line of absolute darkness that seemed to pulse with my own frantic heartbeat. I told Nathaniel everything the next morning. I was expecting him to laugh at me or be angry, but he just slumped into a chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. "You shouldn't have gone up there," he whispered. "She doesn't like to be seen. My father, he believed she was trapped in that portrait, bound by guilt or jealousy. She was beautiful, but she was cruel. They say she drove her own sister to madness." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and feverish. "And now she watches anyone who dares to look too long." I might have chalked it all up to his hysteria, but then I noticed something on my hands. A faint smudge of soot. When I wiped it with my handkerchief, it left a dark gray stain, as fine as ash. But I hadn't touched a single thing in that dusty attic. That night, as the storm finally quieted, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the old house breathing around me. Its timbers settled with a sigh, like a slumbering beast. And then I heard it again. That sound. Tap, tap, tap. But this time, it wasn't coming from the ceiling. It was coming from inside the wall, right beside my bed. Thank you so much for joining me for this chilling tale. If you enjoyed this journey into Ashford Manor, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the shadows. Let me know in the comments what you think is tapping inside the wall. Until next time, stay curious. The tapping persisted long into the night. It came with the regularity of a heartbeat, soft, deliberate, intimate, as though a hand moved within the very bones of the manor. I lay rigid beneath the covers, scarcely daring to breathe. Every instinct told me that to move, to even acknowledge the sound, was to invite something closer. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed felt heavier than before, like the air after a confession. I lit the candle on my bedside table and pressed my ear to the wall. The plaster was cool, faintly damp. For a moment, nothing. Then, so faint I thought it was just my imagination, a whisper slipped through. "Do you see me now?" I stumbled back, my candle trembling. The flame flared wildly, casting frantic shadows across the room. I wanted to cry out for Nathaniel, for anyone, but the house seemed to hold its breath, listening. The whisper came again, a sigh against the wood. He looked at me too long. And then it was gone. At dawn, I left my room, determined to prove that fatigue had conjured the voice. The storm had passed, leaving a weak gray light that filtered through the stained glass in muted colors, reds like bruises, greens like mildew. Claiborne, the butler, was waiting near the stairwell. "You did not sleep well, sir," he said. It wasn't a question. There was a noise, I started, but his gaze drifted toward the upper floors. "The manor speaks in its own tongue," he said quietly. "It remembers those who listen." Later, I found Nathaniel in the library staring into the ashes of the fireplace. "I heard her," I said. "Last night, in the walls." He didn't react, just rubbed his temples. "She's closer now," he murmured. "It begins when the portrait awakens." "What do you mean, awakens?" He looked at me then, with an intensity that made me want to recoil. "Each generation, she stirs when someone looks upon her. My grandfather sealed that room after he saw her eyes move. He said they were not painted eyes at all, but something peering through, a window between her prison and ours. He told me the story. Lady Eveline, beautiful and wicked, wanted immortality. She commanded an artist to trap her soul within the paint. He refused and died before finishing her eyes. My family has paid for that vanity ever since," he shuddered. "Do you understand now why the attic must remain locked? That night, the house was suffocatingly still. When the first tap came, I dropped my pen. It was softer this time, closer. It traced the wall as if following my own outline. Then came a faint scratching near the baseboard. I knelt, pushing on a crumbling section of plaster. A small flake broke away, revealing a narrow crack. A sigh of cold air escaped, scented faintly with lavender. And then, clear as a whisper in my ear, "He buried her beneath the walls." The candle went out. I don't remember running, only pounding on Nathaniel's door. He answered at once, his face deathly pale. "You heard it," he said. He grabbed my arm, leading me down the black corridor. "She's not content to stay in the portrait anymore," he whispered. "Once she finds a voice, she seeks a body." The next day, Nathaniel was gone, locked in the library. I asked Claiborne about Lady Eveline's death. "She did not die," he said quietly. "Not properly. They buried her body, yes, but her likeness, her presence, remained. You may not have noticed, but there are no mirrors in the manor now. That evening, my resolve broke. I had to see the portrait again. The attic door yielded easily. The air was colder, the chill almost liquid. The portrait hung there, but her expression had changed. The serene mouth now held a faint, cruel curve of amusement. And the eyes. They looked directly at me. I stepped closer, whispering, "She was beautiful." A soft creak echoed behind me. I turned. Nothing. When I faced the portrait again, my blood froze. Her painted hand was no longer on the book. It was reaching toward the edge of the frame. I stumbled backward, knocking over the candle. Darkness swallowed everything. And in that perfect blackness, her voice bloomed like poison in my ear. "He sealed me here. But you opened the door." I woke up in my own room. My clothes were torn, my hands streaked with soot and blood. Claiborne stood over me, his expression grave. "You must leave, sir. The house does not forget kindness nor intrusion." Frost had formed on the window pane, an outline like a woman's face. "She has seen you," he said. "That is enough." I packed before noon. Nathaniel was nowhere to be found. As the carriage waited, I turned to look at the manor one last time. Through the attic window, high above, I saw her. Lady Eveline. She wasn't a portrait. She was standing there, smiling faintly, her eyes alight with triumph. I blinked, and she was gone. When I left Ashford Manor that morning, I foolishly believed that distance would free me. The road wound through mist and moor, the house vanishing behind the hills like a half-remembered sin. But even as the carriage wheels turned, I felt her eyes upon me still, a gaze that reached far beyond stone and soil. I returned to London, to the noise and light of rationality, but the city offered no refuge. Nights brought dreams so vivid that I awoke certain I had not been sleeping at all. I would see her, Lady Eveline, standing beside my bed, the hem of her green gown brushing the floor, her painted eyes glistening as if wet with life. She never spoke. She only watched. By the third night, I couldn't pretend it was just exhaustion. The scent of lavender clung to my room, though I owned no flowers. The sketches of the Ashford portraits I'd brought back for cataloging had begun to change. Faces shifted subtly. smiles curving where none had been before, and in every corner of every page her outline faintly emerged, as though my own hand had drawn her while I slept. I burned the sketches in the hearth. The smoke that rose was pale and fragrant with lavender. A week later, a letter arrived. The handwriting was delicate but trembling. It was Nathaniel's. "You were right to leave," it read. "She is restless now. Claiborne is gone. The servants whisper they hear her walking the halls at night. I hear her too, though I do not dare look." The ink ended there, mid-stroke, as if the pen had been seized from his hand. I left for Ashford the next morning. The fog grew denser the closer I came, and when I reached the gates at dusk I found them swinging open in the wind. The manor looked abandoned for years, not days. The ivy had climbed higher, the doors hung crooked, yet the moment I crossed the threshold I felt the air shift, a breath drawn inward, as if the house recognized me. "Lord Ashford?" I called. My voice echoed back, hollow and distorted. I found the library door ajar. Inside, papers were scattered, a teacup broken. On the desk lay Nathaniel's journal, open to a page near the end. "She moves now without the portrait," he had written. "She is no longer bound to the attic. She comes through the walls." The final line was a jagged scrawl. "She wears my mother's face." My heart hammered. I called his name again. From somewhere above, a floorboard creaked. I followed the sound up the groaning staircase, the air growing colder with each step. On the landing, the west wing door stood open. At the far end of the dark corridor, for the briefest instant, I saw her. She stood utterly still, dressed in green, her face shadowed but her eyes catching the faint light. "Lady Evelyn," I whispered. She didn't move. The silence deepened. Then I realized I was looking at her reflection in a tall mirror. When I turned, the mirror was gone. I forced my way into Nathaniel's ruined chamber, and there, hanging above the hearth, was a portrait that had not been there before. It was Nathaniel. His face was a perfect rendering of sheer terror. The paint was fresh. Suddenly the window shattered, though there was no wind. Through the opening came that scent again, soft, mournful lavender. And beneath it, a whisper bloomed inside my mind. "You freed me." I don't remember leaving the room, only stumbling down the corridor as the walls seemed to breathe around me. In the gallery, I stopped. Every portrait stared, their eyes gleaming not at me, but at something behind me. I turned. She was there. Lady Evelyn, no longer confined to a frame. "You see," she said softly, her voice like tearing silk, "I have become what he promised, eternal." Her pale hand reached for me. "Come," she whispered. "He cannot paint you if you are already mine." For an instant her fingers brushed my cheek, impossibly cold. The world tilted, the candle fell. I stumbled back as she watched me, her eyes radiant with pity, or perhaps hunger. Then she was gone. I awoke on the library floor. The fire was lit, the papers gone, Nathaniel's portrait vanished. It might have all been a dream, were it not for the faint gray handprint on my cheek. I searched the empty house. Only the scent of lavender remained, growing stronger as I climbed towards the attic. The door was open. Inside, the portrait stood restored to its place. But the face within was not Lady Eveline's. It was Nathaniel's. His painted eyes glistened with tears. Beneath the portrait, a new inscription read, "Lord Nathaniel Ashford, 1930. The paint was still wet. I write this now from the library. The air grows colder. I can feel her watching me, from the mirror, the walls, the very ink on this page. She has taken everything. Soon, she will take me too. I hear her footsteps descending the stairs, soft and measured. The scent of lavender fills the room, and though I have not turned, I know she stands behind me. The morning after I found Nathaniel's face sealed within that haunted portrait, a strange, heavy calm fell over Ashford Manor. It wasn't peace, Peace was a word long since banished from these halls, but a kind of waiting silence. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to see what came next. The fog outside was a thick, gray shroud pressing against the windows. Not a single bird sang. Even the clocks, those stubborn keepers of time, had stopped ticking. I felt like the last living soul in a world already fading into memory. And yet, beneath the stillness, something stirred. A whisper, soft as a rustle of a silk gown on marble, snaked through the corridors. It seemed to beckon me, pulling me upward toward the attic. I had no choice but to obey. The air up there was colder, older, alive with dust and the faint sweet scent of decayed lavender. I approached the portrait again, Nathaniel's terrified eyes gleaming in the gloom, and knelt before it. "Who are you now?" I murmured. As if in answer, a breeze stirred the stale air. The candlelight flickered, and the portrait's surface shimmered. The paint seemed to shift and bleed, the canvas itself exhaling. And then, behind the painted image of Nathaniel, I saw her. Lady Eveline. She stood within the frame like a reflection in a mirror of smoke. Her lips didn't move, yet her voice filled the air around me, a whisper born of both grief and fury. "You wish to know my story," she said. "Then look, see what they made of me." The attic darkened. The floor beneath me dissolved, and suddenly I was no longer in the present. I stood in the same room, but it was bright, alive with morning sun. The scent of lilac filled the air. Before me, the portrait was unfinished. A young woman sat for it, Eveline herself, radiant and vibrant, her eyes a deep, impossible green. At the easel stood another figure, a man, thin and pale, with hands that trembled as he painted. I knew his name before it was spoken, Julian Ashford, Lord Ashford's great-grandfather. He was the master painter of the manor, a man consumed by his art and by his desire for her. I could feel Eveline's thoughts as if they were my own. She was married to Julian's elder brother, Lord Edwin Ashford, a man of wealth and status, but no affection. She was a bride of convenience, trapped in a cold house that valued lineage over love. In that lonely place, Julian's attention was the only warmth she knew. But that warmth was dangerous. It grew into something forbidden, whispered about in shadowy corners. Every brushstroke he laid upon the canvas was a confession, and she, sitting for hours under his intense gaze, felt the line between devotion and damnation begin to blur. "He told me he would make me immortal," her voice murmured beside me, "that through his art I would never fade. He swore the world would remember me forever. I believed him." The scene shifted. I saw the night it happened. A vicious storm raged outside, rain lashing the windows, lightning tearing the sky apart. Eveline stood before the finished portrait, the paint still wet. It was exquisite, too exquisite. It hadn't just captured her likeness, but her very spirit, her soul flickering beneath the layers of pigment. Julian stood behind her, his eyes wild with something far beyond love. "You are mine now," he whispered. "No time, no decay, no death can take you from me." But she recoiled. "You've stolen what was never yours to claim," she cried. "You have painted not me, but my prison." She reached for the canvas, intending to destroy it, but Julian seized her wrist. There was a struggle, a flash of silver, a palette knife glinting in the firelight. A drop of blood fell upon the portrait, striking her painted gown and vanishing into the pigment. The air in the room crackled, the storm roared. The paint began to move. The figure in the frame blinked, and Eveline's voice came from the canvas now, not from her own lips. "You promised me eternity," it said, "and I will grant it, to both of us." Julian screamed as he was drawn, struggling into the rippling surface of the painting. When the storm ended, only the portrait remained. Upon it, Lady Eveline sat serenely, her eyes bright with a strange, sorrowful triumph. And in the shadows behind her, almost hidden, was the faint outline of a man's face, his mouth open in an eternal, silent scream. Years passed in moments. The portrait was handed down through the Ashford family, each heir swearing to keep it sealed away. But some looked, and those who did found their faces painted there soon after, new additions to the cursed gallery. The attic returned. I fell to my knees, gasping for air. The portrait stood before me, glowing faintly, its eyes no longer cruel but filled with immeasurable grief. "You wanted me to see," I said. Her voice came softer now, like wind through glass. "Yes, because you carry what he carried, the same obsession, the same need to preserve what should be allowed to fade." "I only wanted to understand," I whispered, and so did he. Her translucent hand reached from the frame. This time I didn't pull away. It rested against my chest and I felt a pulse, hers, mine, both. "End it," she said. "Set me free." I looked at the candle beside me. Could I destroy her prison, knowing she might vanish forever? Or worse, take me with her? "Every artist must destroy what he loves most," she murmured. "That is the price of beauty." Her image flickered, and for a moment I saw not a ghost, but a frightened young woman. Then the light went out. When I awoke, dawn had come. The portrait was dark and still. But on the floor lay Julian's old palette knife, its blade rusted with time, and something darker. I picked it up. For the first time since I entered this cursed house, I felt not fear, but resolve. If there was a curse, it would end with me, even if it meant taking her place. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling journey. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the final chapter. See you next time. I can barely remember how that day passed. Time seemed to warp and bend inside the manor, folding in on itself like a dark, heavy curtain. Outside, the fog was a constant, clinging presence. The sun was just a pale, distant ghost, seemingly unwilling to break through the gloom that covered Ashford Moor. I had made my decision. The portrait had to burn. But every time I imagined striking the match, a strange, tender feeling would stop me, a sense of pity for the woman trapped behind all those layers of oil and varnish. Was she still human in some way? Or had she become something else entirely? A reflection without a soul? A memory that fed on longing? Her last words haunted me. Every artist must destroy what he loves most. It was as if the house itself knew my intentions. As evening fell, the timbers groaned louder, the corridors seemed to shrink, and doors that were once open were now sealed shut. The air grew thick with that familiar, unsettling scent. Lavender and ash, a sweetness slowly rotting into something unholy. I went to the cellar and gathered what I needed: oil, lamp wicks, and a tin box of matches. The entire act felt like a desecration, yet I moved with a solemn, ritualistic precision. When I returned to the attic, the candlelight trembled, almost in anticipation. The portrait was waiting. Nathaniel's face stared out, his eyes glistening with tears that could never fall. And behind his image, I thought I could see her, faint and flickering like a ghost in an old mirror. "Eveline," I whispered. "It ends tonight." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, soft as a dying breath, her reply came. "So it must. But beware. The fire does not choose whom it saves." I hesitated. She might be right. The curse was tied to this house, its very walls soaked in memory and grief. Burning her prison might mean burning everything she had ever touched, and I was now a part of that. But there was no turning back. I tipped the oil onto the floorboards. The sharp, dizzying scent filled the air as it spread in silver streams, soaking into the wood like blood into linen. The matchbox trembled in my hand. Deep within the manor, a clock that had been silent for days began to chime. 1, 2, 3. Its final toll echoed like a heartbeat, and with it my last shred of hesitation vanished. I struck the match. The flame leaped to life. It caught the oil, the drapes, the old trunk by the easel. In moments, the room was ablaze with a furious, brilliant light. Smoke spiraled upward, curling around the portrait like ghostly fingers. For a second, I thought the fire would consume it instantly. But something impossible happened. The canvas didn't burn. It began to glow. The paint started to swirl, and Eveline's face emerged where Nathaniel's had been, her green eyes shining brighter than the flames. She looked at me not with anger, but with profound sorrow. "You cannot destroy what was made from love," she whispered. "Only love can unmake it." The fire roared higher, forcing me back. I felt the heat on my skin, the very air catching fire, and yet, from within the inferno, her form stepped free. She rose from the canvas, wreathed in fire, her green gown now shimmering gold. She was beautiful beyond words, and terrible beyond reason. "Julian bound me with devotion," she said, her voice echoing through the blaze. "It was not hatred that imprisoned me, but desire. To unbind me, you must give what he would not." Her hand reached toward me. The world spun. I understood then. The curse wasn't broken by destruction, but by surrender. I stepped forward. The fire parted before me like a curtain. Her touch, despite the inferno around us, was cool. She smiled, and for the first time, it was gentle. "Thank you." Light exploded. The manor shuddered to its very foundations. Beams cracked, glass shattered. The portraits below caught fire one by one, their painted cries rising with the smoke. Through it all, I stood within a pillar of green light, and in that light I saw what was missing. Julian's final brushstroke. It was meant for me. Her story wasn't complete until I became a part of it. As the flames closed in, the line between skin and pigment dissolved. My hand met hers, and the world went silent. I woke to daylight. The ruins of Ashford Manor smoldered around me, the air thick with ash and lavender. The portrait was gone. But on a single unburned wall there was a faint outline, the impression of two figures side by side. I stumbled outside into the fog. Behind me, the manor finally collapsed. But as I looked back, I thought I saw her, Lady Eveline, standing amidst the ruins. She watched me, her lips parted in a silent farewell, then vanished into the smoke. In the nearest village they said the manor had burned down. No cause known, no survivors found. They asked if I'd been there. I said nothing. But that evening, as I washed my hands, I saw the faintest trace of green paint on my palm. And when I looked in the mirror, for just a moment, I saw her eyes staring back from within my own. That night I dreamed of the attic, whole and untouched. The portrait hung in its place, but it was different now. Peaceful. Two figures stood within the frame, hers and mine. We were both smiling, and for the first time since coming to Ashford, I felt no fear. Only quiet. Only release. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more tales from the shadows. Stay curious. It has been many nights since the fire. Or so I believe. Time has grown uncertain here. The days just bleed into one another, like watercolors left too long in the rain. I wake to gray light and sleep to gray silence. In between, I just wander the ruins that once were Ashford Manor. The walls no longer stand against the sky. The air moves freely through what remains, stirring ash and ivy in slow, graceful spirals. Birds nest where chandeliers once hung, and beneath the fractured marble floors, I hear the earth reclaiming what it is owed. I should feel peace, perhaps. But peace has never belonged to this house, or to me. Though the fire consumed the portrait, it did not consume the bond that gave it life. She remains, and so do I. It began the morning after the fire. When the villagers came to see what had become of the old estate, they found only smoke and ruin. They spoke of strange lights in the night, green and gold, of music that seemed to echo from the moor though no wind blew. They said no living soul could have survived. They were right, in a way, for the man who walked among the ashes that dawn wasn't quite living, nor entirely dead. I remember standing at the edge of the burned garden. I looked down at my hands and saw not soot, but faint streaks of paint, emerald and gray. When I touched the scar on my cheek, I felt a warmth that wasn't my own, and in that moment I knew. She had not perished. We had become one. At first she was a whisper at the edge of waking. She would speak to me through the hush of twilight. "You freed me," she would say. "But chains of love are never broken, only shared." I would close my eyes and see her, the green gown flowing like water, her eyes deep with sorrow and serenity. Each night she grew clearer. Each day I grew fainter. My shadow thinned in the morning light. My reflection, once familiar, now shifted when I moved, as if painted on glass. And always that scent of lavender lingered, soft and unending. One evening I returned to the attic. The roof was gone, but there, among the debris, lay a single piece of glass from the portrait's old frame. When I lifted it, I saw her face reflected faintly. She smiled, though her eyes were sad. "You understand now," she whispered. "The portrait was never a prison. It was a mirror. It shows not what is painted, but what is bound." I looked closer. Behind her image, mine began to form. Two faces, one fading into the other, brush stroke over brush stroke. "You are the last keeper of Ashford Manor," she said, "and the first to love me without wanting to possess me. For that mercy, I will not let you die. Stay with me until all memories fade." How could I refuse? The villagers no longer come here. They say the land is cursed, that those who wander too near hear voices from the ashes, see a figure in green walking where no living thing should walk. Perhaps they are right, for I walk beside her still. Sometimes when the moon is full, I feel the house stir again, beams reforming, windows clearing, the ghosts of candles flickering in rooms long gone. For a few precious moments, Ashford Manor stands whole once more. The music of its lost century hums through the corridors, and laughter, our laughter, echoes between its walls. I no longer hunger, nor sleep, nor feel the passage of time. Yet I am not unhappy. There is beauty in this ruin. There is love, too, though it is of a kind the living could never bear. Sometimes I wonder if I am painting her still, not with brush and color, but with memory itself. And in return, she paints me. She gives me form within the mist, voice within silence. Together we are the portrait now, living pigment upon the canvas of the world's forgetting. Last night I heard the sea again. The horizon burned with a strange green light. She came to me then, as she always does. "Eveline," I said. My voice was thin, almost transparent. "Will it ever truly end?" She smiled. "When the last light leaves the world," she said, "and the last memory fades. Until then, we endure. You see," she whispered, her hand finding mine, "the artist and the muse are never apart. Creation is love, and love, when bound by sorrow, becomes forever." We turned toward the light together, and as the dawn rose, I felt myself dissolving gently into her. Then all was silent once more. Only the moor remained, only the scent of lavender in the wind. They will say Ashford Manor no longer exists. But sometimes when the fog rolls in from the sea, travelers claim to see a flicker of light upon the hill. Some hear music, faint and melancholy. Some smell lavender on the wind, and a few, standing long enough at the broken gates, swear they glimpse two figures moving slowly through the mist, one draped in green, the other in shadow. They say the manor's last keeper still walks beside his muse. They say love endures, and I, whatever I have become, know it is true. Thank you for listening to our story. If you were moved by the tale of Ashford Manor, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories from the shadows. Until next time.